This is a Harmony Insights lunch date. I am doing this somewhat selfishly. I wanted to speak with colleagues of mine that I'm inspired by, and Dan is certainly one of those people. So we're doing these every day, or I'm doing these every day at noon Central Time, my lunchtime. Not everybody will tuning in. It will be lunchtime for them, but it is for me. So I'm calling it my Harmony Insights lunch dates. And we've done a number this week. We have a couple coming up. You can find the information about that at harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. Um, my name is Erich Kurschat. If I haven't said that already, I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, which allows me to help companies and consultants leverage the DISC personality assessment with their employees and their clients. A lot of that can be done virtually online these days. And so I'm helping companies do that. I'm also the founder of HR Hot Seat, an inclusive mastermind community that you may be familiar with. And you can find more about that at hrhotseat.com. More important than those things today, I am featuring a very special guest today, Dan Johnson of ATD Chicagoland chapter, who's here to talk with me a little bit about engaging and developing a remote workforce. Dan, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me today. I was going to have a nice view of the skyline behind me, but on my floor it's still cloudy and foggy out. So unfortunately, I don't have an impressive background other than clouds and fog, but I'm happy to be here.
What an odd mix of crystal blue sky and also fog. It's very strange to look out the window right now.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's out there. I can see it peeking up way up high, but hasn't reached where I am yet. So I look forward to it burning off later today. So thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, I have promised folks a meaningful, actionable conversation today around engaging and developing remote workers, which is something that a lot of us have suddenly had to become familiar with to some extent. And before we get started with the actionable piece of it, I want to start off with the meaningful piece. And I've been asking this of all of my guests. To what extent has coronavirus, COVID-19, impacted you personally in the work that you do?
Well, it's actually given me the permission to finish the writing project that I've put off I've put off into the distant future. But what I've found just in the last couple of weeks, especially, is that I work with a lot of leaders and I work with a lot of folks who are in like a caretaking or leadership role, and they're too busy caretaking their families and their employees, but who's taking care of them? So a lot of my coaching work has really been about helping people take care of them. In other words, who takes care of the caretaker, so to speak. So rather than focusing on how do I engage my staff or how do I create trust, how can I just get up in the morning sometimes because I'm too busy giving to everyone else, I'm in charge, there's nothing left to give to myself. So helping people take care of themselves has been a significant shift in the coaching focus of our conversations that I've been having lately.
And now I don't want to make the assumption that you had worked from home previously. Has that been a shift for you? Have you been working from home more often now, or is that something that you did fairly often to begin
I
with?
do a lot of my work from my home office, so that hasn't changed. My visits to client sites, whether I'm facilitating training or on-site coaching, has changed. I'm doing that remotely now. So being at home and being an introvert, I'm totally fine with it. And I just am taking more breaks during the day to play Roblox with my 6-year-old niece and nephew remotely. They're in another state. So I'm taking more play dates with my niece and nephew actually during the day than I would in a normal work day.
I have no idea what that is. I'll have to check out that game.
Not unless you want your head examined. You have to really be 6 or 7 years old to appreciate it, but it's a lot of fun. It's harmless fun. You can do it remotely, which is fun.
That's great. I only gave you a brief introduction. Would you mind
Sure.
telling people a little bit more about your background and what you're bringing to this conversation?
Sure. I'm here representing ATD Chicagoland. That's Association for Talent Development Chicagoland. I've been on the board of this chapter for 5 years. I'm director of new members. And the focus of ATD Chi is about connecting people and resources to improve talent development and human performance. Professionally, I've been working as an independent consultant for about 20 years. My company is Performance Mastery, and our motto is closing the performance gap. So whether that's workplace performance, leadership development performance, we have a variety of strategies to help organizations and leaders close the performance gap between the desired state and where they'd like to be. So currently doing a lot of neuroscience-based coaching and training, and I've been doing that for probably 30 years, but on my own for the last 20.
That's great. You mentioned ATD Chicagoland. ATD Chicago is an association partner of HR Hot Seat. So we've come together as an HR mastermind and said, who else out there is serving a similar audience? HR professionals, sort of broadly defined, and talent development certainly falls under that umbrella. And so I've been, just on a personal note, so thrilled to be working with your leadership, your board, and members on how we can link arms and really collaborate to serve our common audience.
Yeah, lots of resources, whether it's programming and otherwise, for folks who have anywhere they touch talent development.
Yeah, wonderful. So I would love to get a sense from people, and I've put together a brief poll, and part of these conversations is me becoming, quite honestly, a little bit more familiar with Zoom as I go. And I've put together a quick poll, and I think we have just perhaps a couple of people online at this point, but I'm going to launch this poll and give me a sense, if you're willing to participate, what is your general comfort level around engaging and developing remote workers? And I have a few options in here that hopefully you'll see pop up. I'm very comfortable, I'm only somewhat comfortable, or I'm a newbie, teach me. That's the third option I put in there. So hopefully you can see that. If you can't, let me know in the chat section, and that'll give me some helpful information. So as we are considering engaging and developing remote workers, give us the state of the union. So much is happening these days, and from your perspective and the work that you've done, where do you think we are in the grand scheme of things right now?
Well, one of the benefits of remote workers right now is that it really highlights the importance of some basic things we tend to overlook even when we're able to see face to face. And one of the most important things that we can do to engage workers remotely, but also in person, is feedback, and positive feedback and positive reinforcement. A lot of the folks that I'm interfacing with now are working on their own, but they're feeling like they're lost. They don't have a routine. They don't have a regularly scheduled opportunity to speak with their supervisor. They don't know if anyone's watching their work or cares about their work. But most importantly, because people are in a little bit of survival mode, positive reinforcement and feedback is really critical at this point. So whenever I, as a leader or even a teammate, have an opportunity to give some positive reinforcement to a worker, that can make a huge difference to folks who feel like they're just taking a stab in the dark, or doing their work but no one cares or is watching, or just are feeling uncertain. And positive reinforcement is great when we're face to face too, because it's the only tool a leader has to tap on the discretionary effort of a worker for the long haul. You might give someone a bonus or a raise or movie tickets that might tap someone's discretionary effort for a short period of time, but positive reinforcement has been shown to tap on a worker's discretionary effort over the long haul. So the importance of feedback, and especially positive reinforcement, is really highlighted at this time, I think.
And feedback is something that, when we're working face to face, is much more easily done. Not that everybody provides it. Some people struggle providing feedback. That could be an entirely different conversation, right? But
Right.
when you're working in an office, you can very easily stop by somebody's desk or call them into your office and give them props. A little bit different when they're not working right beside you, right?
Right. And it doesn't have to be over the phone. It doesn't have to be even a video conference, even a text or a chat message or something, letting folks know that you're aware of what they've achieved and thank you for their perseverance or thanks for their extra effort. That's all it takes. So it doesn't have to be long and drawn out. And for introverts or those who are afraid to give feedback, whether you're introvert or extrovert, having that electronic means can be a little bit easier because I'm not looking at the person face to face, but it gets us out of the comfort zone because a lot of folks, let's put it like you said, aren't comfortable giving feedback, period. They kind of take things for
Right.
granted. So it's really important to help people feel connected and give that positive reinforcement whenever you can, in whatever form it takes, face to face, text message, email, instant chat, whatever will work.
Right. I'm just want to pause to say, unfortunately, people aren't able to see the poll. I was having this trouble earlier as well, so I apologize for that. Instead of filling out the poll, use the question or the chat area to share with us, other participants, what your general comfort level is. Are you somebody who is very comfortable engaging in and developing remote workers? Are you somewhat comfortable, or are you a complete newbie? Enter that in the chat area so we can see what your general comfort level is. I hadn't um, I hadn't anticipated asking you this question, but since you brought up
Sure.
texting,
Yes.
I've been a part of some really interesting conversations around uh, texting etiquette? Is that something that's done? There are those of us who have been working long enough to remember a time before that was even possible, let alone permissible. um, what is your take on texting these days for engaging remote workers, giving them that pat on the back that you were talking about earlier?
I hadn't really thought about that till you asked me that question.
Yeah,
But a couple things I would invite people to always keep in mind: that just be okay if other people see that text. So make sure whatever you're writing is you're okay that that's being broadcast,
right.
not just to the recipient. But also, even what you say in the text, rather than just saying "good job," make sure you note what that person has done been particularly well. So be specific. So even though there's some etiquette around texting as far as do's and don'ts and what tools you might use, some basic rules still apply. If you're
Yeah,
okay with it being written on a postcard, mailing it in the mail, then you're probably fine, but also making sure that you're being specific about it. Some organizations have their own like internal instant messaging system, and that probably is a little bit more comfortable for people to use versus texting to someone's personal phone number. People might have some discomfort there, or some
yeah,
privacy issues, which I totally understand. Some organizations I'm aware of have their own kind of internal messaging system that is intact, and so they feel more comfortable using that piece. But
yeah.
maybe it's something to give some thought to.
I thanks for that, and I threw that out at you out of left field, so you
Sure.
did a fine job on your feet there. Alex is saying she's mostly comfortable given that her organization is a majority remote, but always looking for new ideas around engaging remotely, especially with clients, which is a unique audience as well. We're talking largely about employees or subcontractors, but clients certainly. Chris says he's somewhat comfortable. My old company allowed work from home, no trouble getting folks set up for it. However, most would still come into the office most days. We had a few bad weather days that were full work from home, but never this long. And that's probably the sentiment that a lot of people are expressing, is either I really don't have much experience with this at all, or I had some and it's much, I'm doing a lot more these days.
Right.
And I'm hearing from people who really want to be good leaders all around. Luckily, that's a majority of my audience that says we crave this information. We want to know how we can do what we do more effectively. And we're realizing, especially now, that remote work has become, I think, going to become more and more, not necessarily a standard, but acceptable and practiced.
Mhm.
Um, Go ahead. You were going to say
I
something.
was just say, as you're talking, something else that I think would be beneficial in engaging remote workers, but also developing them, because this is new technology for some folks, or it's a new way of working. Any way that a leader or an organization can instill confidence in their workforce or worker or person they lead can be real important as well. So championing them, excuse me, championing them, putting them in a place to succeed, but finding ways of instilling confidence is also a critical piece that is missing right now, because people are in panic mode or using technology they're not familiar with. So find a way to instill confidence in your workforce.
Yeah, that's wonderful. There's so much. It's like it's right up there with trust, confidence, good communication. These are things that will have paid dividends in ways that we can't always anticipate. So we talked about a challenge being able to give people timely feedback when they're working remotely, something we want to consider. From your perspective, what are a couple of other very specific challenges that you think people face when they are attempting to engage and develop remote workers?
On the engagement side, I think it's important for folks to have a contact person. Like if I have any challenges or questions, this is the person I can contact during working hours for questions. So having a mentor or a contact person, so people feel like they have some backup. As a leader, I might have my time dispersed in a variety of different directions, but regardless, you can't reach me, but you can always reach this person. So having that stake in the ground that people can rely on, I think is real important. I think it's also important for leaders to have scheduled together time for their team. And that doesn't have to be every day, doesn't even have to be every week, maybe every other week, but a way where everyone can get together, even if it's for 15 minutes or so, just to feel that connection. And then outside of that, that leaders ask their folks on their team, how often would it be helpful for you and I to connect one-on-one?
Yeah.
Some folks like to take the ball and run with it, and they're thriving, like, oh great, no one's watching me, I can do what I want, and I'm happy working by myself. Other folks are like, no, I need closer attention. So finding out and customizing your one-on-one contact with the folks that you lead, I think is real important today too, which we often overlook because we're so focused on the result that we want to get. We're not really focused on what do our leaders need to be, or excuse me, our workers need to be successful. So one-on-one contact and having some scheduled together time, I also think is important right now.
Yeah, I mean, we keep coming back to communication for the engagement piece, making sure that people feel that they're getting the information that they need. Because once you're sent home, it's a completely different,
Yeah.
almost like a completely different paradigm at that point. It's how do I do the work that I'm used to doing in an office here? No one's watching me. Is that a good thing? Am I somebody who I would do a lot of work with personality styles? Am I somebody who would prefer that oversight? To you, it might seem like micromanagement, but to me, it might be the exact level of information
Right.
and due dates and all of that stuff that help me do my best work. Now at home, if I don't have that, I'm responsible for me in my output in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, Anju chimed in and said, shouldn't this be the supervisor's responsibility, team meetings one-on-one? And I just to clarify your suggestion that people have that point of contact, a certain level of connection that works well for them, that is on the leader to help at least assess with input from their reports, correct?
Yes, I would make that a two-way conversation. So rather than the leader saying, I'm going to touch base with everyone once a day or once a week, find out from each person what frequency works best for you. Because, I've worked with some folks who say, I've never met my boss and I've been here for 3 years. We've had one phone conversation,
Yeah,
and some people are fine with that. Some people that drives them crazy. So each person has a different need, as you mentioned. I think it's important to customize that for
yeah.
each worker.
There's a really common quote, and of course I'm gonna butcher paraphrasing it here, but it's something like, the greatest mistake made with regard to communication is assuming that it has taken place. That the person doing the communicating assumes, okay, I've said what I intended to say, and thus it was received. And so just the importance of checking in with the people you're communicating with to say, what did you hear? What did you get out of that? It doesn't have to be an
Yes.
extended conversation, but to have it be a true dialogue is the only way that you can really be certain that your message has landed in a way that you anticipated.
Yeah, reflective listening, being able to paraphrase what you're hearing. Just a head nod isn't enough. And especially remotely, I could be nodding the head, but having you tuned out and listening to my kids playing in the other room. So yeah, very important. I agree.
Exactly. Or your niece and nephew playing
Roblox.
there you go,
Yes.
Roblox. um, I mentioned a little bit around personality styles, and I think I do a lot with the DISC personality assessment. There are certainly other assessments out there, but um, what is your experience with we'll just say different personality styles and helping people recognize, certainly leaders recognize that there are different ways that people want to receive communication, and especially as we're trying to engage them via tools like Zoom or Skype or whatever your platform of choice is, that it's not a cookie cutter approach, that different
Right.
people are still going to have the same preferences and tendencies that they have in the workplace,
Yes.
but now they've taken them home with them.
Yes, and I'll get on my soapbox for
Do
just a
it.
few moments if you don't mind, but this touches
Please.
in on developing workers too. So their Zoom and Microsoft Teams is great for disseminating information, but a lot of organizations and folks in a talent development role have the misconception that everything can go online. And that makes it easier for them to check a box like someone went through training. But Zoom and Microsoft Teams and things of this nature are great for information dissemination, but not for skill building. And this is where coaching comes into play. And I want to give viewers and listeners an important ratio, and that is 26, 24, 50. That's 26, 24, 50. 26% of an organization's development resources should go into pre-training event activities, such as pre-read, a quiz, research that you're asking folks to do, some questions you're asking folks to ponder. 50% of your development resources, or excuse me, 24% of your resources should go into the actual training event, like your Zoom training or online training or e-learning. And then 50% of your resources should go to the follow-on activities, which includes coaching. This remote working is an ideal opportunity to get familiar with the power of coaching one-on-one and in groups, because that is where the skill building happens. I learn about things and techniques in like a Zoom conference or an e-learning piece, but in a coaching session, that's when I get to practice and skill build. So I guess I would invite folks to think about that ratio as they're developing employees. And as circling back to your question about personality styles, people learn differently. People are
Hmm.
visual learners. They like to see symbolically what's happening. People are auditory learners. They like to hear things. Other folks are kinesthetic. They have to do something. And then there's
Hmm.
also some folks who just prefer to read and write. So incorporating all of that in my communication, methods of
Hmm.
communication, in the way I develop workers and interact with them is also some things to be real important. So not necessarily personality styles, but ways that I intake information best can be
Hmm.
helpful, whether I'm trying to engage workers or develop workers.
Along those lines, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. For years, we've heard that everybody learns in a particular way. And more recently, I've been reading literature on the fact that learning styles are more of a preference than anything, that I may have a preference to learn visually, for example, but if I'm only presented with information visually, I lose the opportunity to have other parts of my brain, excuse me, firing, and that I actually will still learn in other ways, even though I have a preference. What is your take on learning styles in general?
I've been learning and teaching instructional design principles for 30 years,
Uh-huh.
and also I'm aware of neuroscience, and I think it's most effective for us to meet people where they are. So
Uh-huh.
if I have an auditory preference, to make sure that that's the best way that I learn, if I have that opportunity, I can be forced to, if I all I have to do is read a book, I can do that, but I'm not going to enjoy it and I won't retain as much as if I can do
Yeah.
my auditory piece. So if our objective is to help people maximize the learning experience, we want to incorporate all those different methods into whatever that we do. Sometimes that's not possible. We all understand that.
Yeah.
But to the extent possible, I think we need to keep that in mind. So even though it's a preference, it also accelerates my ability to intake and synthesize the information. So yes, it's a preference, but it's also the most expedient way for me
Yeah.
to learn. So I wouldn't dismiss it outright
I
if
love it.
I'm developing something.
All
Make
right, great.
sense?
Thank you. It does. Yeah, that's really helpful. Just a reminder for people who are listening in that if you want to ask questions, we take them throughout our conversation, so you can put it in the chat area. We're going to end right at 12:30 to respect everyone's time and schedules this afternoon. So if you want any questions answered, just put them in the chat box, and we'll see if we can get to those during our conversation. We have spent um, a lot of our time talking about engaging folks, I would say,
Hmm.
primarily, a little bit about development, but let's transition a little bit to the development side of things.
Sure.
So I'm a leader. I'm sitting at home at my desk, and somebody chimes in, and they're expressing concern that in this time spent away from the office, they aren't being developed. And to be fair, we've just come out of a couple of weeks of some pretty serious fundamental needs analysis, right?
Hmm.
If we
Right.
talk about Maslow's hierarchy,
Yeah.
we're homeschooling our children now, and we're racing for some reason all at the same time to get toilet paper at the grocery store. And those are much more basic needs. But I think I would make the argument that this week and coming into the coming weeks, we are going to transition into a period where we say, okay, some of those more basic needs are being met. I also crave meaningful connection. I crave continued development, especially since I don't know how long I will be working from home. What would you say to those leaders who are participating or attending today's conversation, who want to begin thinking in those terms?
Well, I do think something I mentioned before earlier is I'm a big proponent of coaching when it's done well. So whether that's leader coaching or having an external or outside resource coach folks on their development. And that can be done in a group setting. So it doesn't have to be one-on-one, but one, giving folks the opportunity to identify how they would like to develop and maybe having folks take on some responsibility for developing themselves during this period of time. It's the organization you can't just go to a training session or sit in front of this program inside the office because it's not available to you. So what can you do, worker, versus always relying on me? Number two, coaching is a great way to customize development for someone. So whether that someone wants to develop feedback skills or how to deal with conflict or increase confidence in the workplace or whatever that might be, or time management or delegation, coaching is a nice just-in-time targeted approach to helping someone develop. And so giving folks that opportunity, even to meet with a coach once a month on that piece, can give them some fuel to kind of exercise their brain in a different way, feel like they're still moving forward, still growing, and also customize it to that extent. So one, asking people to be in the driver's seat for their own development, and two, offering some coaching opportunities, I think is really critical. Some organizations, such as Xerox, say they waste 83 cents out of every training dollar when they don't add follow-on coaching after a training event. So I
Mm.
can't emphasize that enough. That this is a great opportunity for coaching, and it can be done visually, and in my personal opinion, it's even more effective when it's done just over the phone.
Hmm.
So it doesn't take a lot of resources or a lot of money to do, other than the coach's time and the employee's time. So I would invite organizations to think about that. I think it's a critical piece right now.
I love that. And also, is it possible that some people still have access to their LMS resources, that even working from home, people may still be able to tune into a webinar or something else that the company has made available to them to continue their development?
That could very well be too, firewalls and all those things. Each organization is kind of scrambling a little bit, but yeah, that's certainly a piece too. So whatever an employee, and this even happens when we're working face to face, helping folks understand that development is they're in the driver's seat, not just in the
Yeah.
organization's hands. And that can be a little bit of a rude awakening for some folks, but
Yeah.
most definitely.
And if anybody who's joining us who's in that instructional design, talent development space, who's looking to take what they do in person and move it online, just in the minute or so we have left before we wrap up, do you have a specific actionable takeaway or recommendation that you can make to those people who are designing development experiences now for virtual workers?
Yeah, and I guess I would emphasize that again, that 26-24-50 rule, that it's not just the online development experience that you're creating. What are you going to ask people to do beforehand? And then what's going to be the follow-on piece? And keep in mind, if people would just do this, all of us who are in the instructional design field or talent development field would rest easier at night. That this kind of format, a virtual format, is great for information and knowledge share, but skill building happens after, and that's where the coaching. Also accountability, reinforcement, rewards, incentives, all of those things need to be aligned. So if I'm going through the expense of having folks learn something remotely, give them an opportunity to practice, but also make sure that your reinforcement and reward system and accountability systems are all aligned with what we're asking folks to do. And I just typed in the chat function a web address where folks can download just a list of 2 pages worth of tips that people can do to engage and develop remote workers. So that's in the chat function as well.
Great,
For,
that'll be helpful. And you had mentioned when we spoke earlier that you may have a slide to share with a
yes,
QR code. Is that something you have queued up?
I do. And will folks be able to see my slide on their screen? I'll share that right now.
Yeah, if you can share that, let's see if that pops up. Wonderful. So Dan has been kind enough to put together some tips to share with you, some actionable tips. And if you scan, I like the scan me dialog box. If you scan that with your phone, that should take you right to actually it's the same URL that you just shared, I believe, in
Yeah.
the chat function.
Well, the scan me will take you right to the PDF. The URL will take you where you can click on the PDF, and it is a PDF, and it'll be available for folks through midnight tonight if they want to download a list of tips, actionable tips for engaging and developing a remote workforce.
Well, that's great, and it sounds like at least one of our attendees has already gotten it. So,
Right.
Dan, I just want to thank you. We've already run out of time, and as you and I anticipated, we could have spoken all afternoon about this, but I think you've given some really helpful, actionable tips to people about how they can engage and develop their remote team members, their remote workers. How can people find out more about you and the work that you do and ATD Chicagoland chapter?
Sure. ATD Chicagoland is the professional association of which I'm a board member. Our web address is on the downloadable list of tips, but the web address is atdchi.org. We finally refer to that as atdchi.org. And my work with neuroscience-based coaching, training, consulting is at my website, performancemastery.com. That's performancemastery.com. And my LinkedIn profile appears on the screen as well. And Eric, I do want to thank you for giving this valuable service to folks. And again, compliment you on your energy. Just hearing your voice, I can see would be very calming and connecting and centering for folks. So thanks for doing this work. And I think it's really important right now.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was something I got really excited about, and it was
Mm,
made all the better by people like you
great.
who are willing to join me for these conversations. So, as I mentioned at the outset, you can find more about Harmony Insights at harmonyinsights.com. HR Hot Seat, the inclusive mastermind community that I run at hrhotseat.com. And coming up this week, we have a couple of additional conversations that I'm excited to get to, including tomorrow with my friend Ben Warzinski. We're going to talk about why play matters, especially for adults or including for adults. And he does a lot of cool stuff with Lego Serious Play. So I've been waiting to talk to him for a while. And then on Friday with my friend Susan Barbie from Grow Forward Coaching, we're going to be discussing how to take control of your job search and get clarity and confidence in your job search. And then some additional stuff hitting the calendar for next week and beyond. So hopefully you'll join me for all of that. Information at harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. Thanks so much for joining us. Stay safe and healthy, and I hope to see you at a future Harmony Insights lunch date.